Hi, this is the host. Today's question is, can I do an episode on the genius killer? Just a reminder, this episode does contain some graphic content. Viewer discretion is advised. Edward Rulloff was born in 1844 in New York City. From a young age, it was obvious that he was different from other children. A toddler who could read books by the time he was 3 years old, he grew up to be a prodigy who spoke multiple languages, knew much about science and law, and earned his PhD at the University of Berlin when he was just 23 years old. At that time, the university had not yet awarded honorary doctorates, so his degree was hard-earned and well-respected. Returning to the United States, he taught at various institutions and became a popular lecturer. Except there was more to the handsome professor than met the eye, and the dark secret he kept hidden would eventually shock the nation. On the surface, Rulloff was everything a college or university would want its faculty to be: charming, cultured, intelligent, disciplined, and charismatic. Among his colleagues and students, he enjoyed an excellent reputation. They admired him, and some even considered him a mentor. "He was easily the most remarkable man I ever saw," said one of his former students. "I have often thought since that if the will of Providence had been otherwise directed, he might have become a great statesman, lawyer, divine, or judge." That may sound like a glowing recommendation until you hear what comes next. Because behind closed doors, Rulloff was a tyrant. Not only did he dominate his wife Lavinia and demand absolute obedience from her, he also physically abused her and their 4-year-old daughter Alice. According to the girl, her father would beat her mother so severely that she sometimes ended up in the hospital. On occasion, he would threaten his wife by saying, "If you ever leave me, I will kill you and the children." It is alleged that he also beat Alice, perhaps because he felt the little girl reminded him too much of her mother, whom he continued to harass despite her delicate health. When Lavinia was ill, he reportedly told her, "You are a disgrace to my family and I wish you were dead." And if that weren't bad enough, he also threatened his own mother-in-law, saying that he wished she were dead. In fact, in addition to being generally unpleasant, Rulloff was also cowardly and petty. While staying at his in-laws' home, he reportedly shot the family dog for barking at him, then threw its dead body into the fireplace. In 1862, when Rulloff was 18, his wife and child disappeared without a trace. The circumstances surrounding the disappearance were suspicious, to say the least. Several people came forward to claim that they had seen Rulloff acting erratically around the time his family vanished, while others claimed to have heard screams coming from his house. But the police were never able to gather enough evidence to charge him with murder or anything else. The case went cold and the mystery deepened. What really happened to his wife and child? Did Rulloff kill them? And why didn't he report them missing for weeks? These questions only fueled rumors that the brilliant professor had led a double life. And those rumors intensified when it was discovered that he had faked his own death and skipped town. Throughout his life, Rulloff used several aliases, including George S. Brooks, George Washington Gale, John Graham, James Stewart, and William Thompson. His behavior suggested that he was hiding from someone or something. He bounced from city to city, failing to make roots anywhere, always looking over his shoulder, never staying in one place for long. Sometimes he pretended to be a widower and sometimes he claimed to be single. In fact, he was neither. While living in Illinois, he married another woman named Mary Jane Moore. He told her he was a widower whose wife had died in Texas. Only after they were married did he admit that the truth was actually quite different. He admitted that he had killed his wife, though he insisted that he did so in self-defense. Since no charges had been filed against him, Mary Jane decided to keep his secret and stayed with him. Aside from being a teacher and lecturer, Rulloff also worked as a journalist, writing articles for newspapers in Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, and Iowa. He was well paid for his work, which was mostly about politics and science. However, this didn't stop him from supplementing his income through less than savory means. Around 1869, he became acquainted with two men involved in train robbery and counterfeiting, Samuel M. Jones and Charles Gito. Although there is no evidence that Rulloff ever participated in a heist, he did seem willing to turn a blind eye to the crimes committed by his friends. In fact, in June 1871, he cashed a counterfeit $20 bill. When questioned about it, he gave a false alibi, claiming that he was in St. Louis at the time the bill was issued. However, witnesses placed him in Kansas City at the time of the crime. As far as we know, that was the only time he tried to cover up his friend's crimes. Usually he made every effort to stay out of sight, which was why it came as such a shock when he was identified as the prime suspect in a series of robberies. In 1870, there were several robberies and murders across Minnesota and Wisconsin. The victims were primarily teamsters who transported freight, and although the crimes appeared to be unrelated, the authorities soon realized that they all had one thing in common: Edward Rulloff. It seems that Rulloff had gone back to his old habits, bullying, intimidating, and manipulating those around him. In fact, he had enlisted the help of some friends to rob several freight companies. While Rulloff didn't take part in the actual robberies, his presence during the crimes was noted by several witnesses. On July 12, 1870, he left Bloomington, Minnesota with Joseph D. Walker and Thomas McGettigan. 3 days later, the two men returned alone and reported that they had abandoned Rulloff because he was sick. Around the same time, there were several attacks on freight trains in La Crosse, Wisconsin. McGettigan was later arrested for one of the crimes and Rulloff's name came up again. During the investigation, it was discovered that the professor had withdrawn a large sum of money from the bank and cashed several forged checks. When officers searched his home, they found weapons, disguises, and clothing that matched the descriptions of those worn by the robbers. All signs pointed to Rulloff. But instead of waiting for the police to catch up with him, he skipped town again. This time he headed to Chicago. There he worked as a journalist, wrote a book, and continued his search for new identities. However, he didn't get very far. After cashing a stolen check, Rulloff was arrested and sent to jail. He managed to escape after only 5 hours, but not before giving the police a false identity. He was caught a month later and extradited to Minnesota, where he was charged with robbery. At first he pleaded not guilty. Then he changed his plea to guilty, only to change it back again at the last minute. During his trial, he took the stand in his own defense and told the jury that he had never been involved in any robbery. Instead, he claimed that he had come across the stolen money accidentally and tried to return it to the rightful owners. He also denied killing his wife and children, insisting that they had simply run away. The jury was unconvinced. On October 11, 1871, he was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Less than 2 months later, on December 18th, he was found hanging in his cell. An investigation revealed that his death was caused by a noose made out of towels and blankets, which had been prohibited in the jail for some time. How he managed to get his hands on one was never discovered. From the beginning, people were fascinated by the case of the brilliant but troubled professor. The mystery only deepened after his death. Where did he go after his release from prison? Why did he kill his wife and children? Why did he lead a double life? What was the connection between him and the scholar thieves? In the years that followed, many journalists, writers, historians, and filmmakers tried to answer these questions. Some suggested that Rulloff suffered from dissociative identity disorder, while others blamed his difficult childhood. In 1888, a writer for the New York Times speculated that Rulloff's excessive pride and vanity were to blame. Edward Rulloff remains one of the most interesting contradictions in American history. He was a gifted scholar who wasted his potential by dabbling in crime. He was a monster who hid behind his brilliance, a killer who was undone by his arrogance. This is the host. Thanks for watching. If you have a true crime story you'd like to see turned into an episode of this series, use the link below to submit your idea.